There we go. Welcome back. So this is all dry. Plus I got a tour of my backyard where my wife showed me all the work she's been doing in the last couple hours. I married me one of them pioneer women. She grabs that power washer and that leaf blower, not a little wimpy kind, the big shoulder pack kind, and the trimmer and the loppers, and she's going to town. It's wonderful. So this right here is why I enjoy the technique that I stumbled on. I've talked about this, I hope not too often. So how did I get started? How did I get started in this approach, this technique to painting? I did not learn it from anybody else. It evolved right under my nose. It evolved in my own process. 20 years ago, I did an art class, and the sponsors of the class had asked that at the end of the week, they asked the class to produce a joint painting, 10 by 12 foot painting. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's going to look terrible. But it dawned on me that if I did all the black acrylic stuff and then I handed out to the students transparent, so this is where the transparent came from. If I handed out to the students transparent colors, that their transparent paint would not be able to violate or obliterate my black paint. Does that make sense to you? So I did black first, sort of the outline, so to speak, and then gave 15 or 20 students cans of transparent acrylic paint. And as I watched, what to my wondering eye should appear, as I watched those layers, they could do almost anything they wanted with their transparent colors. And as I watched those transparent colors evolve and build up and materialize on this giant 10 by 12 foot canvas, I was transfixed. I had an epiphany. It was a life-changing moment. Because the 25 years before that, I was pretty much a confirmed acrylic hater. Slight exaggeration, but you get the idea. So it is this layers of transparent acrylic is what changed my life, is what I saw, what made the difference. So it wasn't immediately after that, but a short time after that, that I began to incorporate that exact thing into my painting. Transparent acrylic. So it allows you to have extraordinary degree of control without painting like a control freak, right? Because before I'm done, I will have 8 or 10 layers, if you will. It's not quite always the right word, but 8 or 10 stages or layers of acrylic colors on the canvas. And then I switch to oil. Okay, now let's draw David, glad you tried it, my friend. Thank you for wildlife art, eh? Good for you. Good for you. Glad to hear it. Always glad to hear when somebody gives this a try. Okay, so now I'm doing pencils, as you can see. usually repeat emphatically, that the pencils do indeed aid in similitude. They do indeed help me to draw things. Like, for instance, right now I'm drawing some people here on the sidewalk, and the pencils are particularly good for outlining people. They're good for outlining anything, but I really particularly enjoy doing the people thing. But as if you watch me often, you've heard this, you're tired of me saying it, some newcomers, the primary purpose of the pencil is not similitude, but is in fact texture. It is the juxtaposition of scratchy lines next to smushy paint marks is what I like the best. Now I'm going to try. It's real easy to get the perspective wrong on cars. I'll remember. Now, I'm going to leave that for a minute. I want to come into this area. Okay, let me pull this down. I feel like this... Well, David, that's a great idea. David suggests that I ask you YouTube people to share my YouTube videos on your Facebook. Great idea. Thanks, David. Why didn't I think of that? Because I'm thinking about something else, evidently. Thank you, David. Great idea. So, friends, yes, if you would, share a link to your Facebook. That would be wonderful. That would help me accomplish my goal of having a presence on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. Thank you, David. Okay, so I showed you the stairs there. I said early on this particular painting today that I feel like it's, there are some inaccuracies that you can get away with. There are some modifications of the subject matter that you can easily get away with, but I feel like part of what, let me show it to you again, a big part of what that makes this scene interesting is this architecture here. And but if I don't render that particularly accurately, it'll just be a hodgepodge. It'll just be a confused mess. I think people won't be able to really tell what's going on. So I feel like it's pretty important that I render this accurately. So I'm going to take some time here. And here is a case where I really am using the pencils for similitude, for realism. Oh, that line's a little high. Let me change that. So, what kind of pencils are they? They're made by Jerry's Artorama, and they're called Jumbo Jet Black. Jerry's Artorama Jumbo Jet Black. If you want to order some, that's plenty of information to go on. They were described to me as sort of a kind of Conti crayon in pencil form. Those of you who are old art majors or old artists will recognize Conti crayon. If you did any figure drawing back in the day, very possible, if not likely, at least very possible that you were using Conti crayons, which come in the form of a stick, sort of like a pastel, a skinny pastel. Anyway, be that as it may, I like them. They behave, they interact with water in one way. They're sort of like a grease pencil. So they interact with water one way, and they interact with oil and oil painting mediums another way. And I guess I would just say you need to learn to work with it, play with it. that concept. Let me talk about that for a minute. It's a concept that I haven't talked about, I don't think, ever on my broadcasts, and yet it's a long-standing mindset that I've had in the art world for a long time. I'll give you a summary statement first. It is this: every medium, oil, watercolor, pastel, acrylic, charcoal, pencil, pen and ink, woodcut, etc., etc. Every medium, of course, has its own strengths and weaknesses, if you will. I'm not sure weakness is really the word, but every medium, of course, has its own feel. By the way, let me take a hang on to that thought. I'm going to talk about mediums, but before I do, I want to talk about this tree. Real important trick of the trade. In the photograph, the tree is almost straight up and down, but not quite. It leans a little bit, but it doesn't quite lean enough. So in my painting, now if the tree had been perfectly vertical, I still would have tipped it over. The point being, two things. One, you don't want a tree or a telephone pole or anything that's almost straight. If it's almost straight, it's going to irritate the viewer, because the viewers can't tell, the people who look at the painting, they won't be able to tell if you made it crooked on purpose, accidental, or on purpose. So you have to lean. If you're having something leaning, you make sure it's leaning enough so they don't think it's a mistake. Does that make sense? Plus, another big factor that, again, even if the tree had been straight in the photograph, I would have tipped it over. Why? Because, especially this close to the edge, here's the edge. This gives me a vertical line. A vertical line with another vertical line right beside it is redundant, boring, not interesting. So a line that's slanted has much more dynamism, has much more energy. And so I just pushed the tree a little bit more than it is in actuality. Okay, now back to mediums. A summary statement that might be able to help a few people in any medium you choose. Okay, so every medium has sort of its native, natural look, right? This is so obvious. You're wondering why are you saying all this? Okay, good. Every medium has its native or natural feel and appearance and look. Check, got it? But every medium can be wrestled into looking like something else. Now, it takes more work. The wrestle seems to me is the best word for it. You really have to sort of fight it in a way to make it behave differently than its normal inclination. But it can be done. And many times when you do that, you achieve something quite extraordinary. So let me give you some examples and then make some perhaps instructive, some words of instruction. So any medium you pick up, you have a choice to make. The question is, am I going to allow this medium to sort of behave in its normal way? And I would say, well, actually, watercolor has two normals. There are two kinds of watercolor that are very endemic to watercolor, typical of watercolor, standard watercolor. One is the very washy, loose approach, right? And then the other is hyper-realistic, super tight. And I think both of those are natural. They're the native tongue, if you will, of watercolor painting. Let me pick another medium that is not that. And it is, in fact, it was when I was doing this particular medium about 12 years ago that I really became aware of this principle. And that's oil pastel. Oil pastels have a native language, a natural style, a style that most people visually associate with oil pastel. And I think I can describe it. It's typically, in its native tongue, oil pastel tends to be messy. And I say that in a good way. I mean, my acrylics, my paintings have a lot of mess in them, so I don't mean that's not a negative thing, but oil pastels tend to be very messy, fairly abstract, because wrestling them into submission and making them speak realism is not their natural tendency. I hope you see what I mean. Oil pastels tend to be kind of, I would say, gloppy. I'm not sure what that means, but gloppy, chunky. Who's the famous 20th century painter? I'm going to forget. I have his. I'll come up with it later. Let me try for just a second. Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall. I believe I'm thinking of the right person. Marc Chagall. Big, strong colors with clunky, blotchy, black outlines. Now, hang on just a minute. Hang on. Let's do this. I've never done this before. Am I in the screen? Yeah, I am. Let's look up Marc Chagall really quick. Let's see if I've got the right person. I know who I'm thinking of. I'm not sure it's Marc. I think it's M-A-R-C-C-H-A-G-L-L. Yeah. Marc Chagall. And then we just hit images. Yes. Okay, so typical Marc Chagall stuff. Here, I'll zoom in for you for just a second. Bear with me. Chunky and crumbly too, Heather. You're exactly right. Chunky and crumbly. So let's zoom in here. You can look over my shoulder while we do it quick. This is what I think of as Marc Chagall. Now, I don't know if he did oil pastel. My point is, oil pastels often have this kind of look. Let me make one big for you. There you go. Okay. Now, I don't think that is oil pastel, but it looks like an oil pastel. And yes, that's what I mean by kind of bold, abstractish, gloppy, loose, of course. Okay, point being, when you're doing an oil pastel, you have a decision to make. You can either just there we go. In any medium whatsoever, you can say, okay, I'm going to do an oil painting that looks like an oil painting. Or you could say, no, I'm going to wrestle it into submission. And I don't think that this is not a judgment statement, other than it's fun to try to wrestle. I know one person, David Stanley, illustrator from North Carolina. I can't believe I pulled that name out of the hat. Haven't talked to him in 10 years or more, who did a beautiful oil pastel illustration, and he wrestled with it. It was not at all like a Marc Chagall painting. It was tight, feathery, and realistic. I don't know, tight and feathery, those two maybe don't go together. If you want to look up David Stanley illustration, oil pastel, maybe you can still find it. Anyway, my main point is, as a teacher, is simply this: every time you start pick up a medium, especially if you're experimenting, you scratch your chin for a moment. And you say, do I want this piece that I'm about to produce? Do I want the medium to, so to speak, follow its natural course and speak its natural tongue, or do I want to wrestle it into something different? And I think that's neither one is better. I mean, my goodness, my favorite watercolor painter in the world is from Uruguay. Oh, I shouldn't do this to myself, should I? His name is, he'll come back to me in a second. He paints very I mean, not only typical watercolors, but the best typical watercolors, Alvaro Castanet. There we go. And that may not be how it's pronounced, but that is how it's spelled. Alvaro Castanet. It looks like to me like it ought to be Castanet, but be that as it may, he is a traditional watercolor painter, and in my humble opinion, I really am humble about this one, the best watercolor painter in the world, and very traditional. He lets the watercolors speak their native tongue, so to speak. But I think all I want to suggest is that, especially for you young artists, that you understand that that's a conscious decision you get to make, and by no means do you assume, just because you pick up any medium, that you're going to let it speak its natural language. You may, but you don't have to. Funny story in this regard. Fun, sweet, surprising. I get to brag on somebody. Many years ago, 20 years ago, my goodness. For a number of years, I was very involved in street painting festivals and street painting competitions. I think 6 years in a row, like from 1998 to 2004, Raleigh had a street painting festival. And, okay, now this is going to sound like I'm bragging, but hang on. Every year, 6 years in a row, I either won or I was the featured artist. So I was a featured artist twice, and I won 4 times. Now, the reason this isn't just bragging is because I've told this story many times, especially to students. When I tell you the rest of the story, you'll go, oh, well, that's why you won. Okay, now back in the day, okay, no. I was on one story and then I switched to another. Let me tell you why I won later. Let's get back. The first year I was painting, Heather, glad you're an Alvaro Castanet fan. I mean, the guy is, he leaves me speechless, truly, just jaw-dropping. But the first year I was doing a street painting festival, we got to draw all day Friday, all day Saturday, and half a day Sunday. In the years since, they have shortened that down, but I liked it when it was real long, I'll tell you why later on. But the first year that I was there, this one space was empty, completely empty. The artist didn't show up all day Friday, and he didn't show up until like mid-afternoon Saturday. Now, by that time, I had 40 hours into my piece, and he was just getting there. And just in case there's any old Raleigh natives that would ever watch this broadcast, it was Lloyd Skidmore. Lloyd has since passed away. Tragically, but tragically not surprisingly. He was a true artist. I mean, he was so artsy. And by the way, one of his claims to fame, he was moderately famous. He did the set design for the first, I believe this is right, somebody can look it up and find out. Lloyd Skidmore did the first either props or set design, I forget which. Props is one thing, is the objects in the movie. Set design is typically the background of the movie. For the original Alien movie. And I've never actually seen the Alien movie. I've seen lots of excerpts, I've seen bits and pieces of it, never sat down and watched the whole thing. But one thing I do know is that from a purely academic point of view, the visual effects, the visual impact of the movie, besides the scary stuff, the visuals in the movie are extraordinary, remarkable, and they were done by Lloyd Skidmore. Anyway, so I'm there. I've been working. I'm already exhausted. It's mid-afternoon on Saturday. This guy shows up. I can't remember. I don't think I knew him yet. I came to know him in the years that followed, but I didn't know him at the time. Anyway, Lloyd Skidmore shows up. Scruffy, looks a little worse for wear. And for a street chalk festival, right? He brings a big bag of charcoal briquettes. Charcoal, like that you cook on the grill. Charcoal. Rips it open, dumps it out. And a big bag of school chalk art. White art. White chalkboard chalk. That's all. And he proceeds to produce, I don't know if I'd call it a masterpiece. Well, considering what he was working with, it was a masterpiece. It was pretty darn impressive, and it was a lot of fun, and I got a big kick out of it. And the judges awarded him the category Best Use of Medium, which I think I won Best in Show, but he won Best Use of Medium, and I think that was a very good award. So what was he doing? He was exaggerating. He said, I'll show you charcoal. I'll show you chalk in its native tongue, in its native language. Here's what it looks like. And he did charcoal and white chalk. Love it, love it. I mean, I don't want to do it, but I'm glad he did it. It was brilliant. Anyway, and he was a good drawer. He was a good artist. And of course, he threw something down much more quickly than I did. Okay, now back to my other story. Why did I win every year? Again, this is partly for you young people. If there's perchance any young people ever watching this, I did. Either I was the featured artist, like I won the first year, so the next year I was a featured artist. The year after that, I was not the featured artist, so I entered the competition, won again. The year after that, I was the featured artist. That's as much as I can remember right now. And that doesn't add up to 6 years, so be that as it may. Maybe I only did it 4 years, I don't remember. And the reason I won, though, is because, well, I have equipment that most people don't have. And in those days, we started on Friday. And we could draw all day Friday, all day Saturday, and half of Sunday. The judging took place Sunday afternoon. Most people came on Friday, got there at, 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. Some had jobs, so they couldn't get there till later, right? Understandable. But I don't remember what time I got there on Friday, but I got there fairly early. Friday night came, it got dark. There were a few street lights, but it was way too dark to paint. Well, not for me. I had a high-quality, quiet-running Honda generator. I brought my generator, filled it up with gas, turned it on, set up some big Klieg lights on stands, and I painted till 1 in the morning. I was back at 6 o'clock or 6:30 the next morning. I relieved the night watchman and painted all day Saturday, and again Saturday night plugged in. Okay, so you get the idea. That's why I won, because everybody else had somewhere between 10 and 30 hours in their piece. I had 45. So just in case you're wondering, what's the secret, Mr. Nelson? There you go. That's the secret. It ain't no secret. I put in twice as much time as everybody else. Okay, so I do kind of enjoy telling that story because the obvious moral to the story is work your butt off, especially if you want to win. I don't know what you're going to sit on after your butt's worked off, but you get the point. Lloyd Skidmore, though, bless him, Lord bless his soul. I actually, in the years to come later, I discovered that some of my dear friends in Raleigh went to high school with him, and he was a character. He was a good character. We all miss him. And boy, he was a real artist. So when it comes to letting something speak its native tongue, that's a crazy example of somebody doing that. And my hat's off to him, authentically, sincerely, brilliant. Kudos, way to go, Lloyd. School us all. A bag of charcoal. I still laugh about that. Okay, so in that case, what was I doing? Well, I was doing a combination, but I was arm wrestling the pastels on asphalt, on pavement. I was arm wrestling it into realism, as you can imagine. It was fairly realistic, but it wasn't loose and pastelish as much as it was. I was wrestling with it to make it behave in a manner that it's not its natural tendency. Anyway, so just to be aware of that. Some of what I do in my paintings, the pencil work, is it's not a traditional way to paint, as you all know. Not a traditional way to paint in oils. So you could call it a wrestling technique rather than a resting. Maybe that's wrestle versus rest. Rest is let it be itself. Wrestle is try to make it look like something else. Okay, I think I can keep going for a few minutes here. I know I can tend to bore you to tears if you watch too much of me, so hang up when you feel like it. I'm going to go ahead right now and do some dark details, more drawing. Trying to decide what color. My good buddy Mike Rooney rebuked me, if I can use that term, in love, of course, last year. I think it was last year. Because I used to, quite a bit, when I was doing my drawing, my favorite color used to be what I call dark black, B-L-E-C-K, which is basically a mixture of brown and blue, any brown and any blue to get, thanks, Heather. It's a dark gray, neutral dark color. And he said, man, I don't think you should do that because you're killing your color. And color is one of the things that we crave and enjoy, respond to so much in painting. So Mikey, I don't know if you're ever listening, buddy, but I know he does once in a while. But ever since then, I've been trying to do my drawings like this in a color, not dark black. I still do dark black occasionally. So at the moment, just a moment ago, I had purple on my brushes. I just picked up some phthalo blue. By the way, one tip is, if you do drawing at all, like I call this drawing, I think for obvious reasons, it's a good idea to change. Don't use the same color throughout the entire canvas. Let there be an evolution of, start out with one color, then go to another and another and another, because variety is such a huge part of what human beings enjoy seeing in a work of art. Variety in every regard. Variety of texture, variety of values, variety of colors, variety of line, variety of shape, and so on. So just always, variety is of optimal value. This photograph evidently was taken in the winter or whatever time of year when the trees were bare, mostly bare. And I believe I'm going to retain that look. I don't have to. I could put trees. I could put leaves, foliage on these trees. But I think part of what has drawn me to this photograph, again, for those of you who joined me late, there's my photograph printed out on my ordinary, Office Depot printer, and then laminated with plastic, which is just, it makes the colors more intense for one thing, and also preserves the print so that I can use it more often. So yes, I think I'm going to retain the bare trees. Right now I'm scratching with the butt end of a chip brush, my favorite brush in the world for sure. I don't usually show you this. Let me give you a quick glimpse at my acrylic paint palette. It's all these little pots. I have violet, magenta, permanent rose, something like that, cool red, orange, yellow, green, phthalo blue, ultramarine. That's the really important is you have to have each of those, brown and white. Any brown, any green, any orange. Not fussy about any of those colors. And all of those are about 50% medium, right? That's what makes them transparent. You don't go to the store and ask the person first, could I have some of those transparent watercolors? I mean, could I have some of those transparent acrylics? No, you make them transparent by adding the medium to them. Part of the reason I showed you that, I was going to say that the colors that I use the least in those 9 pots is brown. Second least is green. And right for a minute there, I actually used green to do that bush. But I find that I don't, like right now I'm putting a very, very neutral color on my canvas. And that's just a nod to realism in the photograph. These trees over here are very neutral brown gray, so I just, as a shortcut this one time, they won't stay that color. I'll do other colors on top of them. You are very welcome, R. Taylor. Glad to have you on board. I'm going to use a little bit more brown. So, having just confessed that I don't use brown all that often, I'm going to use it twice in a row. I haven't said this in a while. Very, very important principle. If you paint the way I do, and there's many different ways that, to paint sort of like me, but not adhering in any strict way. If you paint in layers, a distinct underpainting and overpainting, and that would include a lot of people, who are not painting exactly like me per se. I've got a drawing mistake here, I just noticed, and I've got to fix it. Okay, while I fix it, let me keep talking. I've got a ridge here that doesn't belong there at all. So, if you paint in layers, here's a really interesting and important, in my opinion, principle to understand. Not only is it okay if your underpainting layers don't have every line in the correct place. Not only is it okay if those lines are not in the correct place, believe it or not, it's actually advantageous if all of your lines are not in exactly the right place. Now that requires some explanation there, doesn't it? Not only is it okay for your underdrawing, can I use that word? For your underdrawing not to be perfect, it's actually beneficial for your underdrawing not to be perfect. Oh, boy, getting it the right degree of perfect. And trust me, when I'm finished a painting, I want it to be accurate. That is, I want the perspective not to have, I don't want any wonky perspective things happening and so forth. So I'm working on pretty careful, accurate rendering. But in the underdrawing, I don't think I've ever used that term before, underdrawing as opposed to underpainting, like what I'm doing right now. Not only, I'll repeat it, not only is it okay for your lines to be slightly erroneous, slightly wrong, slightly off. Not only is it okay, it's actually better. Now, that's assuming we're going to come later and correct anything that's wrong. Once I explain to you why, I think you'll be able to go, oh, yeah, that really makes sense. I get that, because it's not hard to explain. Let me talk about the converse, the opposite. What would happen if every line that you put down... Heather, let me interrupt to answer Heather's good question. Yes, I have continued to do the fuzz layer, and it's not any color. It's any color, not particular to yellow ochre. Usually, of course, a light color like white. And yes, if I want it warm, yellow ochre is my favorite go-to color to warm white. But yes, not on every single painting, but generally speaking, welcome back, Heather. Good to see you again. Generally speaking, I do, in fact, still do the fuzz layer. Not on every painting. I've discovered that sometimes a painting just doesn't need it. It's got plenty of fuzz just the way it is, going into the last layer. Okay, so back to, not only is it okay for your underdrawing. Again, never used that term before, but I hope to remember it. That's a really good way to put it. Not only is it okay, it's actually beneficial. And it's easy to illustrate this way. Imagine that in the underdrawing process, you put, from the very beginning, you put every line in exactly the right spot. What would happen then is, as you go later in the painting process, layer number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, each layer, if your first lines were dead on, then your second line, also third, fourth, what you end up with is stiffness. What you end up with is just, you know, like the line piled up in paint, layer, 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 this way. And there's not much, it's too tight. On the other hand, if your underdrawings are slightly off, and then you make corrections as you go to the next layer and the next layer and the next, you're making corrections, the lines develop, oh, this word I'm looking for, it's not develop, the lines, I'll say develop, a jittery effect. That is, if you put a line here and then change your mind, say, no, it should be here, and then you change your mind again, so no, it should be here and here. When you come to the final edit, you lock it down, you nail it down, you decide where it is. But all those erroneous lines add a great deal of interest to the texture of the painting. Whereas if all your early guesses were dead on, you don't get that interest. Does that make sense? So I think that's pretty easy to explain. It sounds very counterintuitive, like, no, you're kidding me. It's actually better to be wrong. But believe it or not, it is. So one of the effect of understanding that principle, of course, is that it frees you up to not paint like you're a scaredy cat, to not be afraid, to just slap something down, man. Slap it down and fix it later. Because in the slapping, you'll be wrong. And then you fix it later. And the process of fixing it is the term I'm using right now. The process of fixing it actually makes it better than it would have been if it had never been wrong in the first place. Now, of course, everything I'm just saying, so almost you have to, it has to be wrong to the right degree. Does that make sense? It's like, it's easier said than done. Yeah. At least for me. Now, I have been for the last 8 or 9 years, and maybe it's longer than that, I don't remember. I can't remember when I became consciously aware of this, but it's been quite some time now. I've been on a very conscious quest for my paintings to be more accurate. Okay, so if you look back at my paintings from 8, 9, 10 years ago, you'll see they're not quite as accurate as they are now. So I've been on a quest for more realism, more accuracy, and, listen to this, more messy at the same time. Okay, and when I say conscious, I mean that. Like with every painting, I'm going, man, I want this to be, I really want it to be accurate. Now, of course, I'm not measuring, I'm not gridding, I'm not spending hours, you know. So even what I just said, you kind of have to take with it, you know, within a certain limit, because it's obvious that I'm not doing all those things. But I want my drawings to be accurate. That's the, if you will, that's the easy part. I also want them to be more messy. Ah, there's the rub. There's the hard part, if you will. Accurate and messy, both. And between those two, accurate is easy. It's the messy part that is challenging. Like, What do you mean messy? How messy? Good questions. Good questions. Not an easy answer. It's that very, very intuitive artistic flair, if I can use that word. The artistic flair that makes a good painting particularly good. Again, not to. I love realism, and late in my career, who knows? I might revert. I reserve myself the freedom, or reserve for myself the freedom to move back to a more realistic approach if I so choose. I sort of doubt that that's going to happen. But realism for me, and I think for a lot of people, realism is easy because it's not getting things accurate that's hard. It's the messy part that's more difficult, harder to learn, harder to nail down. But then again, I am reminded over and over again that there are a lot of people that don't understand, don't really get the messy thing. They respond to realism. So everyone, and I enjoy doing realism. It's kind of like, it's fun for me. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. It takes time, takes a while, but it's fun. It's very relaxing. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned this or not. I probably have, but I don't remember. I made a conscious decision. I've been painting more or less in this manner, this acrylic, messy, transparent acrylic underneath, and neater oil on top, since 2004. It was a hard stop. It was I didn't curve. I didn't evolve into this. I went home one day painting one way, came up the next day painting another way. Long story, I won't get into it, but I can date it very specifically, this summer of 2004. So I've been painting this way 14 years. And I very much remember I made a very conscious life choice at the time. I said, okay, I had just really started doing full-time fine art. I'd been an illustrator for decades before that, but was making the switch to fine art. And I said, okay, I can either paint super realistic and slow and maybe produce, 12 paintings a year or 20 paintings a year, right? If they take a long time. Or I can adopt a messy approach to painting, and I can paint 100 paintings a year. And then I said, okay, when I'm 70 years old, which at the time was still 20 years away, now it's only 6 years away, 5.5. When I'm 70 years old, will I be a better artist if I do A or B? And I didn't have to think very hard. I said, you know what? If I do the messy, fast painting, but I do 10,000 of them between now and the time I'm 70, I think I'll be a better artist than if I do the neat, realistic, tight approach, but render, finish 1/4, 1/5, 1/6, 1/10 as many paintings. So I decided, okay, when I'm 70, I'll revisit this question. I really did. When I'm 70, I will revisit this. Of course, I can revisit anytime I want before then, but especially because the goal is to be a good artist by the time I'm 70, as I've said many times. When I'm 70, I can decide, I can change my mind. And in the back of my mind, I'm always going, yeah, when I'm 70, I might switch. I might become a super tight, realistic portrait painter at age 70. And I'm still convinced that my decision was valid. The decision to do a whole bunch of paintings quickly will make me a better artist than contrary. It doesn't mean anybody else is supposed to do that, but of course. That was my choice, and I feel like it was a good one. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here just because I've been rambling on forever and ever. Thank you for your company. The next thing I'm going to do when I come back is a second application of white. The painting is, I'm liking it. I'm liking the color. I'm liking the warmth of it. I'm liking the drawing. Mostly, I'll continue to revisit, are these cars the right size? And in fact, I don't think they are. I'll revisit that. But the next thing I need is some white. I'm definitely in need of some white. And before I do that, I'm going to take a little break. Thanks.